Welcome back to 1984. Le Bourdonnais is winning 4 games to 3 and it's the first to win 6 that will take this 5th match. So, double plus good for him. Today's special guest commentator is Big Brother, the leader of the English Socialist Party. So, will Le Bourdonnais be able to take McDonnell to move 101? Let's find out. We have e4 from Le Bourdonnais, e5 from McDonnell, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4, bishop to c5, and of course Le Bourdonnais goes for the Evans Gambit. And we all know that all gentlemen must accept a gambit, and McDonnell is a gentleman, so he accepts. Big Brother doesn't really like gentlemen. They might be a threat to party control, but the game continues. c3 pushing the bishop back. He goes back to a5 and Le Bourdonnais takes the opportunity to castle. Here we have d6 from McDonnell, letting the light square bishop out, and d4 in the center, leading to a pawn exchange. And here McDonnell brings his bishop back to b6, trying to line up against the king here. And Le Bourdonnais continues now with d5, attacking the knight, and last time in game number 7, McDonnell played knight to a5 and Le Bourdonnais won after only 21 moves. But let's shove that down the memory hole because this time he tries something completely new. He brings his knight back to e7. e5 now from Le Bourdonnais, and McDonnell moves his knight again over to g6. Now, e6 would be interesting for Le Bourdonnais, but instead he decides to play his bishop to b2, getting on this nice diagonal. And from here, McDonnell captures the pawn. The bishop captures back, and of course it's protected by the f3 bishop. So McDonnell doesn't want to capture it here, but he needs to be wary of this bishop coming into the corner. So McDonnell simply develops his knight to block it. And Le Bourdonnais just captures, and the queen captures back. You'll notice that this is attacking the rook in the corner, but McDonnell just brings his other rook across for a check. Now, Big Brother says the party wants him to block with knight to e7, but McDonnell doesn't really want to leave his king stuck in the center of the board, getting pinned and all the rest of it, so he dissents. He moves his king across to f8. You'll notice that Le Bourdonnais needs to be careful not to move this knight here because the bishop and the queen are looking quite dangerous on the f-pawn here. So Le Bourdonnais develops his second knight to d2, which also reveals the defense of the queen on the rook, so the queen can no longer capture the rook in the corner. McDonnell develops his light square bishop to f5, and we have queen to b3 from Le Bourdonnais. McDonnell decides his king needs a bit more space, so he pushes h6, and Le Bourdonnais pushes a4. We have rook to b8 from McDonnell. He's defending the b pawn because he's anticipating the wing pawn coming forward, which it does, to attack the bishop. So the bishop advances. Le Bourdonnais brings his bishop back to d3, offering a bishop exchange. But McDonnell doesn't go for it. Instead, he brings his knight into the action, and instead Le Bourdonnais initiates the exchange. We now have knight to e4 from Le Bourdonnais, attacking the dark square bishop. But again, McDonnell ignores it, and he threatens mate. He brings his queen to g4. Big Brother doesn't approve of that at all, far too free thinking. We have g3 now from Le Bourdonnais attacking the knight, although this pawn is pinned, but regardless, McDonnell brings the knight into h3 to give a check. Now, this knight here is undefended, but Le Bourdonnais moves out of the check and protects the knight. McDonnell's bishop is still under attack from this knight, so he moves it to a defended position, but Le Bourdonnais captures it anyway. The pawn captures back. And here, Le Bourdonnais lifts his wing rook all the way over the top to threaten the queen. So the queen goes all the way back to d7, and Le Bourdonnais has trapped McDonnell's knight. So what does McDonnell do? He pushes on the king's side. The rook captures the knight, but not to worry too much, comrade. McDonnell has a fork. So what does Le Bourdonnais do? He decides that he's going to save his rook. The pawn captures the knight, which comes with check, and the queen captures back. So Le Bourdonnais has won back the gambited pawn, so it's even on material. But if you look at the position, you can see that Le Bourdonnais has 1, 2, 3 pawn islands, whereas McDonnell has 4. And McDonnell's rook is stuck in the corner, so it looks like Le Bourdonnais has the better position. Big Brother says McDonnell should go for a rook exchange with rook to e8, but McDonnell commits another thought crime with queen to b5. Queen to f6 would put McDonnell in a lot of trouble, but instead of this, Le Bourdonnais brings his rook off of the wing to e4, and McDonnell tries to get his rook out of the corner with rook to h7, although Big Brother does say freedom is slavery. That's some doublethink for you. But Le Bourdonnais just goes for queen to f5 and attacks the rook, so the rook comes across to g6 now. Le Bourdonnais plays his rook up to the 7th rank, trying to pressure this pawn, although it does give up this wing pawn, which McDonnell captures, although not really, because the rook comes across to capture b7 now. And you'll notice that if McDonnell captures the rook here, it's immediate checkmate from the queen. It's covering the back rank and the rook's covering these escape squares. So instead of capturing the rook here, McDonnell brings his queen back to d8 to protect the back rank rook, and he in fact gives up the pawn on the wing. Somewhat desperately, McDonnell decides to offer a queen exchange, and perhaps keeping the queens on the board would be to Le Bourdonnais' advantage so that he can hunt down more of these pawns, but he decides to accept the exchange anyway, and the rook captures back. He now brings up his second rook to double up upon the pawn in front of the king, so McDonnell defends it with his rook, and Le Bourdonnais chases it back with his pawn. Le Bourdonnais is starting to slightly worry that he's got too many undefended pawns here, so he brings his rook back to e2 so that it can come across in time to defend one of them, and McDonnell does indeed attack it, so the rook comes across. McDonnell now starts to advance his king, and Le Bourdonnais tries to put pressure upon this pawn, although of course it is defended. McDonnell has the time to move his rook down to b4 to attack this undefended pawn, which is easily defended with h3. We have king to g6 continuing to come forward, and Le Bourdonnais brings his rook up to d3. McDonnell brings his rook across to double attack the f-pawn, and Big Brother says we've always been allied with East Asia, and Le Bourdonnais pushes f3 to defend. Big Brother says play h5 to try to break up the pawn island, and we've always been at war with Russia. I mean East Asia. We have rook across to a4 now from McDonnell. King to g3, he wants to get his king moving now, whilst McDonnell just plays a waiting move. Le Bourdonnais continues to make progress, and McDonnell continues to wait. Le Bourdonnais brings his rook to the back rank, threatening to come across to check the king from behind, which looks quite mean, so McDonnell defends with his king back to g7. Rook to e3 now, and again Big Brother suggests pushing the wing pawn to try to break up the pawn island, but instead McDonnell brings his rook back to a6 to defend this central pawn a second time. Le Bourdonnais now has the chance to double up his rooks upon the back rank, threatening to check from behind again, so McDonnell makes an escaping square by bringing his rook across. Now here Le Bourdonnais could bring his rook across and go for this h-pawn, because if McDonnell plays, for example, another waiting move, then you can push this pawn, and then either the rook or this pawn is lost. For example, if you try to save the rook by bringing it down, for example, you're going to check the king. He's going to have to move to f6, and you're picking up this pawn. However, Le Bourdonnais doesn't go for this idea to attack the pawn in the corner. Instead, he brings his rook up to e7. McDonnell gets his king out of the corner and threatens the rook, so the rooks once more double up and threaten the pawn. McDonnell simply defends by bringing his rook back, and Le Bourdonnais decides that he needs to think of a new idea and gets his e-rook out of there. Once more, McDonnell just plays a waiting move, and Le Bourdonnais goes for f4. Now, Big Brother says that this is ungood for Le Bourdonnais, as it allows McDonnell to gain some space. For example, he can push the h-pawn, and you can't capture here because you're pinned, so you might just advance here and give a check, and now the king can come forward. However, McDonnell doesn't go for this. Instead, he plays his rook across to h7, and Le Bourdonnais gets h5 in instead. Now from here, McDonnell ought to bring his rook to the back rank because this pawn is in danger. I'll show you what I mean in a moment. For now, McDonnell instead brings the rook across to try to threaten the king, so Le Bourdonnais gets it out of that pin. And again, the rook should come to the back rank, but instead, McDonnell just plays another waiting move. Now, I'll show you what I mean. Le Bourdonnais has rook to e8, and now nothing is going to stop the rook coming across and doubling up to take the pawn, and this rook is locked in. The king can't get across to help, and yeah, everything is just stuck. You can even try to attack this pawn here in exchange, but then you're just going to get checkmated, so yeah. However, Le Bourdonnais did not see this rook to e8 move. Instead, he played his rook across to f3 to defend this pawn. Once more, McDonnell just plays a waiting move, and Le Bourdonnais brings his rook across to c3. Rook to g8, finally getting on the back rank, and we have rook to c6. This offers a rook exchange, which is accepted. The pawn captures back, and now Le Bourdonnais has a pass pawn. But then so does McDonnell, it's just far less advanced. We have king to e6 from McDonnell, and now f5 with check. This is double plus ungood for McDonnell because the king is going to have to move and undefend one of the pawns. So which one does he want to save? He decides to save the central one. But meanwhile, Le Bourdonnais continues pushing his pawn. It's just one square away from castling, so McDonnell is forced to block with his rook, and Le Bourdonnais has the time to take out another pawn. McDonnell decides that he's going to run for it. The rook comes across to get behind, keeping an eye on it, but the pawn keeps on coming. Now, from here, we have g5 from Le Bourdonnais, and McDonnell picks up the f-pawn. The best move for Le Bourdonnais here is to actually capture the pawn on the wing. I'll just give you a quick example line. The king's going to threaten the rook, so the rook comes across out of the way and both sets of pawns start to advance. The rook is now forced to come back to cover the queening square, and the black king gets into position to help pick up the white pawn. The white king is now going to advance, and you'll notice that the rook can't attack it here because this square is covered by the pawn. So the king picks up the white pawn, and the white rook gets into position to pick up the pawn. In fact, the pawn here is now completely lost, because should you try to defend it with the rook, then you'll see that the pawn is queening. So you're going to have to do a king move, for example, and the pawn is lost, and now there's nothing stopping these pawns getting across and queening and taking out the rook. So what did Le Bourdonnais do in this position? He didn't see this in this position. He didn't see this, and instead he pushed the G pawn. And believe it or not, Big Brother says that the game is now a draw, should McDonnell be able to play the perfect moves, which he does. At first, he threatens the rook, so the rook captures the pawn, and the black rook captures the white pawn, and the white rook comes across to f4. Now, the drawing idea in this position is to bring the black rook down to the first rank and start checking the king from behind like this. And if you repeat forever, of course, it's a draw. But also, if you should advance towards the rook like this and not retreat, keep attacking the rook, you're going to take out the rearmost pawn, and it's going to end in a draw this way. Of course, if he advances in front of the rook instead, like this, you're going to take out the rook, which is even better for McDonnell. In fact, it's a very nice endgame position to practice. However, Big Brother says that ignorance is bliss, so maybe you don't want to try that. And back in this position, McDonnell in fact missed the drawing opportunity and played his rook across to a7. And Le Bourdonnais is still winning. He brings his rook up to f8, and McDonnell brings in a check, but this just allows Le Bourdonnais to start advancing his king across the board towards the rook. Just a friendly reminder from Big Brother, war is peace, and the king comes to e3. Now, you might think that the rook can just come up to a5 here and threaten the rearmost pawn, but if he does that, you're just going to push this to g7, and it's inevitable that you're going to get the pawn across. And after the exchange here, of course, Le Bourdonnais is completely winning, so you can't just threaten the rearmost pawn like that. In fact, McDonnell just keeps checking, and the king keeps on coming. That's check again, so the king moves, check again, and the king attacks the rook. So the rook comes across to g4 to try to keep an eye on this pawn, but the white rook now threatens the final black pawn. The king comes across to try to help, but the pawn is lost. The king threatens the rook, which is kind of stuck in the corner here, but not really, because it can give a check defended by the pawn here. Now maybe the king should come back to f6, where it will be more active, but McDonnell instead decides to go onto the back rank, where it's completely hemmed in by the rook slicing across the board. Meanwhile, Le Bourdonnais starts chasing the rook again, and here it comes, flying across the board as fast as a king can, and by this point, McDonnell has had enough of that and evacuates the rook out to b4. But the king doesn't chase him back, he comes forward to g3. McDonnell plays a waiting move, rook to a4, and the rook comes out of the corner to f7. He wants to get in front of the king. And once more, McDonnell plays a waiting move. He is keeping an eye upon the fourth rank, stopping the white king coming forward, but McDonnell can easily make a bridge with his rook. However, h6 would actually get him much closer to victory, but Big Brother is not interested in the good of others. He's interested solely in power and is quite happy when the rook comes down to f4 instead. We have rook down to b1, perhaps trying to get behind the king this time, but the king moves forward to g4. And indeed, he comes across to check the king, and the king moves across to h4, but now he's confined to the wing. Perhaps moving to f5 would have been better. McDonnell takes the opportunity to get his king off the back rank, but the rook comes up to give him a check and force him back again. He can't come forward because it's instant checkmate, of course, so back he goes to g7, and Bourdonnais comes back to f3. McDonnell is now hoping for a perpetual check, but Bourdonnais is not interested in a draw. He tries something different, offers a rook exchange, which of course McDonnell is not going to accept. He brings the rook across to a1. Now, the next move is move number 90, and the most we've ever had is 99 in game number 1 of match 3, so let's get a counter up down below and keep a track of this. Will Bourdonnais take McDonnell to move 101? We have rook to g4 now. And once more, Big Brother says that McDonnell has the chance to draw. He just needs to bring his king forward. Then should the white king move, you're just going to perpetually check from the side. If you try to push the pawn, for example, the rook is coming across to check from behind. Now after the king moves, you're going to check again, and you're just going to take out the rook, and you're going to pick up this pawn, and the black king is just going to stay in the corner, and it's just going to be a draw. But again, McDonnell misses the chance for the draw, and instead of playing this simple king to h6 move, he just plays his rook to b1. So what are you doing, McDonnell? That's crazy. Rook to e4 now from Bourdonnais, and a rook to g1 from McDonnell. Rook to e3, and McDonnell finally gets his king into h6, but the rook is coming up to e7, and it's looking a lot like an imminent checkmate. Only it's not, it's actually yet again another drawing opportunity for McDonnell. All he needs to do is bring his rook up to g4 with check. Should the king capture, that's a stalemate. The king can't move, but he's not in check. So the king is going to have to move downwards, and you're going to give another check here. Again, if you capture, it's stalemate. But if you move aside here, you're losing your pawn. And now after any other move from Bourdonnais, for example, bring the king up, you're going to check and you're going to lose this pawn, and it's just going to be a rook against rook stalemate endgame. You could try pushing the pawn, I guess, but you're just going to lose it this way instead. That's a check, forking the pawn. However, you'll be completely unsurprised to know that in this position, McDonnell did not in fact spot the stalemate. He checked from behind. So the king moves across to g4. Now you'll notice that the checkmate threat is still on, so McDonnell is forced to check from behind, and the king moves up to f5. It's move number 95. We're getting very close. The rook checks again because the checkmate threat is still on, and we have king to e6. Now, the king is able to pick up this pawn. It's undefended, which he does, and the pawn advances to g7, just one square away from queening. McDonnell is starting to think that English socialism isn't such a great idea, but Big Brother tells him to reject the evidence of his eyes and ears. It is his final, most essential command. Rook to g1 now, getting behind the pawn. King to f7 to cover it. McDonnell checks, and the king moves to a place where it can't be checked anymore. So McDonnell is forced to try to cover the pawn this way, but the king is coming across to f8 once more, and that's move number 100. We've done it. We've beaten match 3, game number 1. But what's the position like now? What can McDonnell do? Well, he can try to check again, but if he does that, the rook is blocking, and you've got no more moves. You can come across again and pick up the queen when it appears, but now you're just losing to a rook versus king endgame. What if you, instead of coming across, try to go this way and do a skewer? Well, it's exactly the same thing. After the king moves, you're just losing to the rook versus king endgame. So back in this position, on move number 100, looking ahead to move 101, McDonnell realised that that is where his worst fears lie. 2 plus 2 does not equal 5, and he resigned the game. So Bourdonnais is now winning 5 games to 3, just 1 away from winning the match. Big Brother is angry again. War is not meant to be won, it's meant to be continuous, and you are late for your 2 minutes hate. See you next time.